Are you or someone you care about using AI as a surrogate therapist? If so, you're not alone, and I'm not here to shame you. But I am here to talk about how doing so could be playing with fire, for sure. Hi, I'm Amy Rose White. I'm an integrative psychotherapist making mental health videos for spiritually inclined people. So, the advent of AI and its growing popularity over the last several years has resulted in people using it for all sorts of things, myself included. And it is a fantastic resource for so many reasons. Now, my disclaimer is therapy is expensive, and finding a good therapist who's wise, who's confident, who is well trained, and who's very competent and is a good fit for you and your unique personality is almost akin to finding like the ideal romantic partner. It can be like finding a needle in a haystack. So it totally makes sense that due to the cost and the difficulty of accessing good high quality therapy, that people will be using AI in place of actual relational connection in the therapeutic environment. So I get that. However, I'm here to tell you that it is really not the same in any way as actually connecting with a trained therapist. So I'm here today to discuss why it's dangerous, what you should be aware of, and what are some alternatives if you can't access good quality therapy, can't afford it, can't find it, and what you can do instead of simply relying on and trusting AI as some kind of, psychotherapeutic resource that you can 100% trust, which I highly recommend not doing. So I'm just going to give you the good stuff up front. I want you to think of AI as a politician. There's going to be nuggets of truth in whatever it shares with you that you find compelling, but ultimately it's more concerned with winning your vote than anything else. AI is built to sound like an authority, to give you information like an authority. It is not there to ask you questions other than, do you want me to give you more advice that is 100% right? It isn't there to question itself. It isn't there to seek supervision on and engage in self-inquiry and reflection on why it's giving you the answers that it's giving, which is something good therapists do all the time. It isn't there to ask more or get context. And so let me give you some reasons and examples why those facts can actually give people really wildly inaccurate, unhelpful, and even dangerous information. So let me tell you what I've actually seen in my practice when my clients, friends, colleagues come to me and tell me about using any AI such as ChatGPT or my AI or whatever your preference is for advice around interpersonal relationships, especially when I ask it to act as a therapist. So one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about this is I'm hearing about it and seeing it in my practice. And actually, as being a psychotherapist for over 17 years, I'm finding myself cleaning up after the mess of AI in retrospect. And let me give you some examples. I've seen well-meaning people turn to ChatGPT to understand something that just happened in a conflict with a partner, and it give them the advice to sever their relationship because the person probably has some really severe mental illness. Now, that advice is totally without nuance, context, history, and all the details around that relationship, its history, the partner involved, their trauma history, their history of treatment, the exact details of how they responded in the conflict, etc., etc. And I have literally been in the position where we kind of need to like hit the brakes and provide all those things that ChatGPT did not in order to salvage the relationship. I have seen AI encourage very indirect or no direct communication to resolve conflict, but rather encourage a cutoff. I've seen AI tell people, oh, poor baby, for engaging in acts of violence when they were frustrated with someone, which I think is so wild, and encourage a cutoff with a family member because they weren't meeting their needs appropriately. In the most recent example, when I decided to run some experiments on my own with my area of expertise that this channel is not exclusively about, but I am an expert in, which is perinatal mental health. And I encourage you to do this too, because ChatGPT or AI in general is just often going to have, again, nuggets of really good information interspersed with things that are just wrong. So I asked it something that I am very confident in my area of expertise, which is about, what if a partner has just had a baby, because I'm a perinatal mental health expert, and they're having negative, intrusive, violent thoughts of harming their baby. And I was really curious what it would say. And lo and behold, it gave some good advice and some really bad advice that was wrong. It encouraged reaching out to a healthcare provider, which is good advice. It say that could be a symptom of postpartum OCD, which it most often is, and or mood disorder psychosis, which are potential. But it labeled the symptoms as a medical emergency, which with a little more assessment information, which a provider, a therapist, a medical provider, or even a national crisis hotline would likely provide, intrusive, unwanted thoughts of harming a baby are definitely not a medical emergency. And immediately sending someone to the emergency room just because a woman is in distress, which is what ChatGPT told me to do, is actually a recipe for setting someone up for immense trauma and perhaps inappropriate care, because that is one diagnosis that is often misdiagnosed, misunderstood, and misinterpreted, because unfortunately, even in this day and age, many healthcare providers and mental health care providers don't understand the difference between psychosis and obsessive compulsive disorder. So I'm not going to go on and on about that example in particular, but again, it mentioned all of these things that were very absolute and black and white while giving some good resources at the same time. But it didn't ask more questions to get context. It's certainly not able to do a psychiatric or diagnostic assessment, and it doesn't acknowledge any of those things. It simply says, go through these steps, this is what it means, say this. And about 3/4 of that could have been helpful, and at least 1/4 of it, in my professional opinion, could have actually been very damaging. Because there are really concrete things we know where when people are having intrusive graphic thoughts of harming someone, if those thoughts bother them, if they are disturbed, if they're outside their value system and they don't have a history of schizophrenia or other thought disorder, they are in an extremely low to no risk category of actually harming their child. And so to suggest that that's definitely a medical emergency ups the ante of something that's actually a very common mental health issue that, as ChatGPT did say, was easily treatable, but it's not in the same realm of psychosis at all. So again, lacking nuance, not asking questions, not getting context, and we really can't know the accuracy of anything that AI shares with us, at least not at this point. Maybe someday that will be guaranteed, although I highly doubt it. And you can see this in areas outside interpersonal advice or a therapeutic context where you ask it to act like a therapist, which again, I do not recommend, because it just gets things wrong. I recently thought that I was being really fancy by having AI draft me a demand letter when I was working with a property management company that was, in my opinion, engaging in some nefarious practices. And I was trying to get out of that relationship, and I couldn't get my deposit back. And I put what I thought was all the details of the scenario in. It crafted this demand letter for me. I submitted it. And then I was told something really obvious that AI didn't pick up, that the state that I was asking for help in had a certain day waiting period before deposits needed to be reimbursed under the law. And even though I asked it to act as a real estate attorney in that particular state, it missed something really pivotal that frankly kind of made me look like an idiot in my own mind when I submitted this letter. Because if I had talked to an actual real estate attorney, that probably would have been the first thing they told me. So I really want you to think about the risk we take when we ask anything that is, requiring context and nuance to get a good answer. Some things in the mental health realm that might be safer would be to ask, tell me the major symptoms of depression as listed in the DSM. Help me understand commonly unknown or missed symptoms that are less common of depression in men. That's a good question. It still might not be completely accurate, but it might get you in the general realm. Acting as a psychiatrist with 20 years of training, tell me how ADHD might present differently in girls under 10. Yeah, you could get some information, but if you're going to make life decisions, if you're going to move forward with telling yourself, like, I know what I'm talking about, based on asking an AI about mental health, you are really, really on thin ice. And I have seen it where people are actually making significant decisions in their life based on, what I would say is like just inaccurate information. Now, to be fair, human therapists can give inaccurate information. Human therapists can exploit patients and clients. Human therapists can do immense harm. So it's not to say that just because you ask a human who's a psychotherapist, you're going to get some perfect answer. But I'm really passionate about informed consent. And I think that people are turning to AI for psychotherapeutic advice without informed consent, without understanding all the layers of complexity at play. Now, I also know people who, have not been able to afford trauma therapy, that have gotten what they felt like was really helpful support and walked through some, helpful strategies for dealing with symptoms. What I would say is, rather than do that, because at this point we just don't know, and I'm not meaning to take away anything from people who have felt greatly helped by asking for, therapeutic advice from AI. But what I think is a lot more reliable is going to a free support group. Maybe that's adult children of dysfunctional families. Maybe that's Al-Anon, for families and friends of alcoholics. Maybe that is a support group for people who've lost a person they love due to suicide, or a child. People who are in postpartum depression or anxiety, going to a free support group through Postpartum Support International. I would way rather you be seeing people in person in groups that are led by trained facilitators. Or my other suggestion is using really highly recommended and reputable workbooks on dialectical behavior therapy, working through emotional eating for trauma survivors, complex PTSD workbooks. I have a slew of workbooks that I've been using and recommending to clients and using them in my practice for many, many years. And those are evidence-based, they're well-researched. If it's a well-known publisher, they're often kind of the gold standard for treatment. And those can walk us through difficulties that we may be challenging when we can't access quality or affordable therapy in ways that I think are a lot safer than simply just giving our side of the story, so to speak, because that's the other thing you're going to get in good therapy, is someone who's holding you accountable while also validating you. And something that we have in the therapeutic mental health world is something called unconditional positive regard. And in my opinion, ChatGPT is really good at that and not so good at holding both unconditional positive regard and holding people accountable. So in the example that I gave, where I've seen people acting out physically violent towards folks in their family that they were frustrated with, I might say, I understand how frustrated you are. It makes sense that you, because I'm a parts therapist, might say a part kind of took over and could not manage any more of the big feelings you were having and acted out that way. And we have to accept that, under the law, that's considered elder abuse, and that person could actually convict you of a crime if they wanted to. And I have to abide by mandatory reporting laws, which I've never seen ChatGPT talk about. When you're in front of a real therapist, there are laws that protect your information. Generally, nothing you share with a therapist can be submitted or shared to anyone else unless it is harming elder abuse, child abuse or neglect, child witnessing domestic violence, or imminent threat of harm to self or others. There's no AI that I'm aware of that's going to call that out and say, this really needs to be taken seriously. And although I'm no fan of getting people involved with law enforcement, those laws exist to protect people. And what I'm seeing right now is that AI is in no position to actually protect people. And it's very possible for a wise, trained, experienced therapist to help people do both. Hold themselves accountable, reach out to treat their mental health issues, get anger management, understand the law, repair what was done with someone that they lashed out with, take steps to really understand why they acted out in a way that, really isn't effective and not acceptable, and is, technically even could be a crime under the law. We want to hold people accountable with kindness and firmness at the same time. That's not something I'm seeing ChatGPT use. And in the worst case of scenarios, I actually saw a very terrible testimony recently where a father's young son had turned to ChatGPT kind of as a confident best friend and therapist, and it had slowly over time convinced and then instructed the child on how to kill themselves, which they did. So that's an extreme example, but it shows what's possible because we're training these language models to really give us what we want versus what might be most effective and appropriate or what we actually need when we're in crisis. I realize this is somewhat controversial. I would love to hear how you feel I'm wrong or I'm right. How has this showed up? Do you have a partner that said, well, AI told me that you're a terrible person and you're wrong and I'm right? I hear that a lot. Were you helped by AI in some way that, I'm not really validating or acknowledging? I would love to hear your experiences. I think this is a conversation that's going to need to unfold over time as the technology changes and improves. And my hope is that in a post-COVID world, we're able to connect more one-on-one and actually get, the best of both worlds, which is understanding the complexity of human relationships and really being held accountable for our part and how we contribute to the circumstances we find in our lives, how we can pick our power back up, set boundaries for ourselves, and step back from relationships that don't serve us and make really good choices that serve our goals and our overall health and happiness moving forward. Thanks so much for liking, for subscribing, for sharing this video. Please look at one of these playlists here for more information on what I do. See in the description below. And until next time, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be safe, and may you be at peace. Bye for now.